Assalamu alaikum. And I extend much solidarity and love to Ramallah this afternoon from Ireland. I'm very pleased to have been asked to contribute to your conference. And the theme which I will address is progressive global change is possible, the centrality of Palestine and the future of national liberation politics. So to begin, this year marks the 80th anniversary of the United Nations Charter being adopted, which has become the foundation of the United Nations itself and our international law framework. The Charter emphasises the universal nature of human rights, the exercise of self-determination, and global peace. Following the defeat of fascism in 1945, the United Nations Charter fueled the emergence of a new international moral order, which established the primacy of multilateralism, diplomacy, and peaceful coexistence in managing global relations. In the colonised countries of the Global South, it inspired a wave of anti-colonial and independent struggles. The Charter directly challenged the existence of imperialism and colonialism. In short, it declared the right of oppressed peoples to be free and to their self-determination. 10 years later, in 1955, the Bandung Conference brought together 29 newly independent and still colonised countries. This was another watershed moment. It gave voice to the popular aspiration of peoples in the Global South to control their own destinies. The Bandung Principles explicitly expressed support for universal fundamental rights and the United Nations Charter, for national self-determination and sovereignty, opposition to racial domination, and for equality and peace. The Bandung Principles foreshadowed the launch of South Africa's Freedom Charter just 2 months later. From the midst of the apartheid regime and Afrikaner repression of the black and coloured people majority, the Freedom Charter outlined a democratic vision for South Africa, with equality, justice, and shared prosperity at its heart. It made clear that the people shall govern, and the land shall be shared among those who work it. This was a seminal proclamation about the future of South Africa at that time. While it initially receded from popular memory in the face of relentless repression, it later became a catalyst for the resurgent national liberation struggle in the 1980s. As a result, the intensified armed struggle and emphasis on mass mobilisation throughout South Africa provided inspiration to other national independence and anti-colonial struggles elsewhere in Africa, as well as Latin America, Palestine, the Basque Country, and Ireland. Earlier in the century, Ireland's own Freedom Charter was expressed in the proclamation of the Irish Republic, declared at the outset of the Easter Rising in April 1916. It too was a visionary, transformational document, which asserted the sovereign right of the Irish people to be free. It looked towards the establishment of a national republic, guaranteeing religious and civil liberty, equal rights and equal opportunities for all its citizens, and resolved to pursue the happiness and prosperity of the whole nation, cherishing all of the children of the nation equally. And today, it continues to inspire the popular momentum for national self-determination in modern Ireland. The central importance of the United Nations Charter and the enduring legacies of the Bandung Principles and South African Freedom Charter represent important frameworks to inform how the challenges and contradictions of the modern geopolitical context are managed. They codify the basis of a new rights-based world order. Currently, the United Nations Charter and multilateralism are under sustained and deliberate attack. Since the beginning of 2025, the words and actions of the new US administration have confirmed its total rejection of the existing rules-based approach to managing geopolitical relations. The build-up of US forces in the Caribbean and associated threats to Venezuelan national sovereignty, in direct violation of international law, reminds us that a new, dangerous world order is indeed emerging. The most graphic evidence is clear in United States complicity with the Israeli Zionist plan to annihilate the Palestinian people through the genocide in Gaza and annexation, apartheid and ethnic cleansing in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Israel, as all of you know, systematically violates international law. It defies the United Nations Charter, and it is carrying out multiple crimes against humanity in Palestine because the US allows it to do so with complete impunity. The failure of the United States to take action regarding Israel's systematic violations of the Gaza Agreement brings this sharply into focus. As a result, the entire Middle East region is being destabilized and pushed towards a potential political abyss. And this suits US imperial interests. Noam Chomsky has correctly described Zionist settler colonization as the most extreme form of imperialism. There is a direct correlation between US and Israeli objectives in the Middle East. At the heart of all the present global turbulence is a relentless determination to reassert US global domination through the use of inherently destabilizing strategies. Hence the threats to begin trade wars and the demonization of international partners. Support for unilateral attacks against Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and the unprovoked war against Iran, and the violation of Qatar's national sovereignty by Israel, now viewed throughout the Middle East and elsewhere as a terrorist state. And we can also add to this list by including the narrative which denies the existence of a worldwide climate emergency, as well as the continued aggressive implementation of US imperialist objectives in the Caribbean and Latin America, and in particular against Cuba. The fundamental rights conferred on every nation by the United Nations Charter are now being routinely ripped up, and repeatedly so on the floor of the United Nations General Assembly and the United Nations Security Council. Meanwhile, wars rage in Ukraine as a result of the imperialist interests of Russian oligarchs, and also in Sudan and elsewhere due to the legacy of neocolonialism in continental Africa. However, Palestine crystallizes the fundamental contradiction between the right to self-determination and colonialism. It is the most totemic national democratic struggle of our generation. It is consequential for the Middle East region and the international community. At this time, the ceasefire agreed in Gaza is being used as a proxy to maintain the objectives of the Zionist occupation by continuing to exert military control on either side of the so-called Yellow Line, whilst denying the suffering people of Gaza access to essential medical and humanitarian aid and resources in order to simply survive. The deployment of Israeli armed and funded counter-gangs are obviously designed to undermine community cohesion, to confuse and demoralise, and to cause political instability and conflict. And in the West Bank, the situation, as all of you know, on the ground has now moved beyond a point of crisis. The attention of the world must now be turned to the scale of the terrorist settler colonialism, the increased violence, and the intensified annexation and demolition of Palestinian homes which is taking place. New strategic and political challenges confront the struggle for Palestinian national liberation as a result. National unity among all Palestinian political movements and parties has become more urgent than ever. The Beijing Accord of 2024, signed on to by all of the main Palestinian parties and movements, should be implemented in full. A strategic consensus with clearly defined objectives is required to navigate the new conditions of struggle which have emerged. Agreement on a united political strategy would provide direction on popular mobilisation within Palestine and an effective coordinated international solidarity campaign against the occupation and apartheid. Gaza and the West Bank have become litmus tests for the enforcement and primacy of international law, and for the United Nations as an institution itself as the principal multilateral institution we rely upon. This latest phase of Israel's 100-year colonial war in Palestine is being used as a proxy to expand its borders into Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. Israeli expansionism is inextricably tied up with the strengthening of US economic and military interests in the Middle East and Asia. And that is what the Abraham Accord strategy and normalising of relations between Gulf states and Israel is all about. Palestine and its people are pawns and bargaining chips in these power plays. What is happening in Palestine represents an existential strategic challenge for global democratic opinion. And it asks the question for us, friends, about what type of world we choose to live in. That is, one which is dominated by US imperial interests and proxies, or a multilateral global system built upon rules and principles which respect the rights of all people to determine their national futures and to live in peaceful coexistence with each other. The future of Palestine is about much more than the human and national rights of its own people. It has become the fundamental existential question about the future of humanity and morality. Our modern geopolitical landscape has been shaped by imperialism and colonialism. And if you think about this, in the aftermath of World War II, some 55 states existed. Today, there are nearly 200, as old colonies have fragmented and broken up. The straight lines on maps which delineate states in Africa and Asia are products of European colonialism. Bismarck used the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 to cantonize Africa and manage the colonial carve-up between rival European powers. 4 years before Lloyd George imposed partition in Ireland by the British, his contemporary, Balfour, foreshadowed the formation of a Zionist state, and he predetermined that the Palestinian people would be made stateless. Another British politician, Churchill, dictated the boundaries of Iraq and consigned the Kurdish people to a political prison. Today's war in Sudan has its origins in the decisions made by European imperialists from the same era. The current instability and conflicts in Africa and the Middle East stem from the pursuit of present-day Western economic and political interests. It is clear that modern imperialism and neo-colonialism continue to dominate world affairs. The largest Western states continue to shore up their economic and military dominance through the G7, NATO, and the Five Eyes Surveillance and Espionage Alliance. The role of the G7 has institutionalized the gap between the global South and the global North. The result is a division in humanity maintained within a neo-colonial framework which perpetuates underdevelopment and global inequality. The fact is that the ideology of the big powers in the global North is premised upon a built-in psychology of racial supremacy. Inferiority is still defined by skin, colour, culture, ethnicity, and language. And yet, despite this, significant global shifts and realignments are happening. The courageous leadership given by South Africa, by taking its case against Israel to the International Court of Justice under the Genocide Convention, inspires hope. Its role, alongside Colombia and others in developing the Hague Group, as a multilateral platform against Zionist colonialism in Palestine is hugely significant. At the same time, the expansion of the BRICS partnership is creating a bulwark against the attrition of Western neoliberalism in the global South and global East. The influence of the African Union and the community of Latin American and Caribbean states can no longer be ignored. These organizations and partnerships reflect the moral and the political power of the global South. And they are beginning to reset the geostrategic power balance in relation to global economics, finance, politics, diplomacy, and the exercise of international law. The mobilization of Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Arab countries, which are committed to the multilateral order, along with other democratic voices, will be essential to bringing about reform of the United Nations as an institution and restoring its authority. And whilst colonialism continues to cast a long shadow, we cannot and should not lose sight of the fact that our global landscape has also been progressively shaped by anti-imperialist struggles. The republics of Cuba, Vietnam, and South Africa all grew from the national liberation tradition. The legacies of Fidel Castro, Ho Chi Minh, Nelson Mandela, and the recently deceased Pepe Mujica are beacons of inspiration. They remind us that change is possible, no matter how impossible that may seem. The proof is to be found in the progressive governments in Brazil, Uruguay, Chile, and Colombia. All have their roots in anti-imperialist and national liberation politics. That is, the politics of self-determination, people's sovereignty, and a vision of social and economic transformation. Change for the many, not for the few. The pursuit of self-determination and national democracy is the defining struggle of our time. The right of nations to make their own laws, to decide their relations with other nations, and to determine their own destinies, as expressly provided for in the United Nations Charter. That is what sits at the root of the wars against Ukraine and Palestine. The difference, however, is to be found in the appalling double standards of political action applied towards each case by the European Union and Western powers more generally. The violations being waged against international law in plain sight are a deliberate assault against the principle of national democracy. Respect for self-determination is the key to establishing and maintaining a multipolar world based upon equality, diplomacy, and peaceful coexistence. It is a prerequisite for people and societies being able to choose their own economic and social models. And friends, this throws up a reality check for the achievement of societal transformation, because choosing a new progressive order is not an option if your country is partitioned, annexed, or colonised. Today, the denial of national democracy is the defining political issue in Ireland, in my country. And whilst we enjoy an irreversible peace settlement under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, this is not a political settlement. In Ireland, constitutional change is finally on the political horizon. The partition of our country is now conditional because the mechanism for national self-determination has been secured within the agreement. Of course, Irish unity is not inevitable, but a unity referendum is, and my party, Sinn Féin, has made that an objective to be scheduled by 2030. Ireland's political landscape has been irreversibly changed by the Irish peace process, by Brexit, demographic changes, political realignments, and the influence of Irish Republican political strategy spearheaded by Sinn Féin. A new era of democratic politics now centres upon the role of persuasion, negotiation, creating progressive alliances, popular momentum, and increasing international support for Irish reunification. Sinn Féin recognises the need to mobilise a broad axis of international partners to assist us with the transition to a new constitutional settlement. However, progressive internationalism is also an expression of our Irish Republican ideology. So while we seek international allies for the cause of Irish reunification, Sinn Féin embraces our duty to others by providing working solidarity with those oppressed by colonialism, occupation, and apartheid. As internationalists, we have a responsibility to give hope and to deliver positive change in the world. Palestine stands as the most urgent international cause of our generation. Malcolm X summed it up well in a global context when he said, and I quote, "The situation in Palestine serves as a brutal reminder of the consequences of colonialism and the ruthless dispossession of indigenous people. It is an agonising reminder that the struggle for justice knows no borders, and we must stand united and in solidarity with all oppressed peoples anywhere around the world." Friends, Palestine is a microcosm of the contradiction between colonialism and the forces committed to national democracy. The catastrophe of Palestine and the reactionary nature of this emerging world order now demand that a fundamental strategic discussion commences among political parties and movements and governments from within the national liberation tradition. There is an urgent need for a strategic discussion around a new global vision based upon multipolarity and multilateralism, and for alliances to create a counterweight against the surge of neocolonialism. That is, a new internationalist political agenda with national democracy and self-determination at its core, which draws on the revolutionary experience of the global South and North, and advances a realistic and a pragmatic alternative to guarantee the national and social rights of working peoples. In the midst of the global adversity and challenges which we face, those who stand for democracy, justice, peace and hope must demonstrate that Palestine will indeed be free and that another world is possible. Friends, to conclude, it is time to put the politics of national liberation at the centre of global politics once again. A luta continua. Venceremos. Thank you. Shukran.